And I mean, you are the culmination of that which you repeatedly and consistently do. So, if you are appearing in front of your audience in a way where you blend into a sea of similarly branded, companies or artists, that's not a good place to be necessarily, right? So if that's where you're going to end up, you might want to do everything you can to stand apart, or at least to more strongly convey what the actual emotion is there.
You are now listening to the Creative Juice podcast, brought to you by Indepreneur.io.
What's up, Indies? Welcome back to Creative Juice Podcast. I am your co-host, Circa. With me is my co-host, Corrin. What's up, Corrin?
Not much. I just am like, it's such a great mood. I haven't been on in a couple of episodes now, and I missed it, man. I miss being here. So thanks for having me back.
Oh, of course. Yeah. So today we're squarely in branding month. As we're recording this, we're in the middle of giving away a $3,000 artist branding package in our contest, which will be over by the time this comes out. Super excited about that. But I wanted a chance to talk with Corrin about branding as it pertains to artists before we do close out branding month. And so that's what we're going to be talking about today. But we also have a couple of updates about the Facebook and Instagram ad platform that we did want to get out. For anyone who's listening who needs to know these changes. So we're just going to get that out of the way at the top of the episode, and then we'll get right into talking about branding. The first thing we want to make everyone aware of is that if you're running fan finder campaigns or video campaigns, the optimization for these campaigns has changed. So we used to optimize by 10-second views. Now Facebook's making us all switch over to throughplay. And throughplay is an optimization where Facebook will try to get you more people who watch 15 seconds to all of the video. And obviously that's going to mean higher cost per result because the result we're targeting is more difficult to get. So we're going to have new standards for what you should be shooting for with through plays, what's a good result, what's a bad result, coming out soon. But you should see those changes in your ads manager if you haven't already.
It's funny because they've been there for a while and everybody's been asking, should I optimize for 10-second or through play? Same thing with campaign level optimization. Everyone's been asking, should I budget? Should I do a campaign level? And it's like, Facebook's going to make you. So it probably means go ahead and just do it because you're going to have to kind of move over to it anyway. So you may as well get used to it now. But I mean, so far through plays, it's interesting because it has cost maybe parts of a penny more, but I've actually seen it kind of the costs have been going down in a lot of my campaigns for through play or staying the same relatively, especially for videos that are over 3 minutes. Whereas, when they're shorter videos, it's actually gone up a little bit. So it's really interesting. We'll see how it all shakes out, but it's definitely finding those people who are in, especially I think for me, when I'm on mobile Facebook, I don't have the app on my phone anymore because I did this, but I would get into that suggested news video feed and OMG, I would just be there for an hour and then I'm like, oh, my life is happening without me. Where do I go? I think that's there. You're really feeding people up in there, and getting those through plays. So, it's pretty interesting, all these changes that are coming.
Yeah. And in the same vein, Facebook will soon be removing the ability to optimize at the ad set level, which is disastrous for kind of how we test audiences, but it's not the worst thing in the world because they're trying to give us features like split test, which is another more recent feature in Facebook ads to allow us to do our testing and then carry that over to a full campaign. But it all kind of speaks to the idea that Facebook as an ad platform is just getting smarter and smarter every single week. And as they get smarter, they want to kind of add training wheels or add safety bumpers to make sure you don't do anything that's going to be disastrous towards your results. And so they're kind of limiting the scope to give us better results in our ad campaigns. Facebook loves consistency. Facebook loves campaigns that just run and run and run. And when we optimize by ad set, we're typically shutting off ad sets left and right or upping the budget on ad sets.
Right.
And Facebook kind of wants to remove that capability so that less fiddling is going on and the campaign can just run and hum, really. So that's very cool. And that's going to mean changes for FanFinder, where I'm in the middle of updating FanFinder right now. So by the time that this episode is out, the whole training should be updated, or, save for maybe a module or a couple of lessons. But yeah, we've had to completely revamp it to reflect those changes. And it's just all part of a larger narrative, which is that Facebook's getting better and it wants to make it easier for you to take advantage of how it's getting better by removing your ability to kind of screw it up. So that should all be hitting your ad account very soon, and you will lose the ability to optimize by ad set. But we've got workarounds for testing that should allow you to test in the same way that we have in the past.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think the biggest thing that we're going to see, having difficulty with that is when you're doing tour stuff, for tour dates. And, obviously, like if you've got a set of 10 tour dates and, one of them is New York is going to soak up a ton of that budget if you use campaign level optimization. However, one of the accounts I work on already has transitioned to basically mandating campaign level optimization, which is strange because it's something that it allowed the account to opt out of, but basically everything is that unless you opted the entire account out of it. So I guess they're like rolling it out early or something. But essentially, what you can do is that when you're using this campaign level optimization, you'll be able to set limits of the ad sets. So even though you're still going to be optimizing at the campaign level, at the ad set level, you're going to be able to set limits. So that way, if you're spending $25 a day on a tour, when you're doing New York, you can limit New York to a certain percentage of the budget so that it doesn't all 90% go to New York, So you're still going to have some control. But I think you're right, Circa. I think Facebook's really just trying to get people out of the weeds. Sometimes the questions we get, in the indies group or even in like DM Engage, like regular marketers, and sometimes it's like, okay, you're getting just a little too focused on something that ultimately doesn't need to matter because the algorithm works. And so they're taking elements out that are, making you fiddle with stuff you don't need to be fiddling with, So there's still going to be, but it's going to change, I think, how people need to think about, the way that they're optimizing, especially tour ads. But I think it'll still be all really good. We'll just have to see how it shakes out.
Yeah, I tend to agree there. I think it's all for the better. A lot of people, like, you can kind of tell who's successful in marketing when you're in like a marketing Facebook group by like the people who are acting like the world's on fire, they're not having a good time. And the people who are just kind of like, you know what I mean? Like the people who don't obsess over every little change or just kind of power through it.
What is this error I'm getting? It's like, it's yellow. You're fine.
Like they're...
Just move on with it.
They're having trouble, right? Yeah. Yeah, like if I see something while setting up a campaign where I'm like, oh, that's weird, or I don't know how that works, or that doesn't look like this training I'm following to set this up, I usually just skip it or ignore it. And, I've never ruined my life to do that. But, but yeah, so hopefully this will be helping those people who just kind of, they explode immediately when they see these issues. So that's definitely good. Thank you, Facebook, for continuing to update and improve your product all the time. Nobody else seems to be telling Facebook that, so we just wanted to say thank you, Zuck.
Thanks for that, Zuck.
And then lastly, Facebook Ads Manager is getting a facelift. Business Manager, I believe, is as well. So you should be seeing a new user interface, not dramatically different from the one that you've experienced up until now if you've been running ads. I've seen the new UI. It just looks cleaner. Looks like it's going to be easier to navigate instead of having the tab view where we're choosing campaign tab, ad set tab, or ads tab. That's going to be changed over to like a list, kind of like we're seeing in the edit panel for Ads Manager right now. So that's helpful, and it's probably going to make it easier to get around in Ads Manager.
Yeah, it's one of those things too that means you're going to be seeing a lot of people complaining about it every time anything looks different. People
Yeah.
have a problem with it, but overall, I mean, I know that when I'm navigating it, and creating ads and editing my audiences and stuff, I always end up in that portion, right? And I don't go click back out to campaigns and try to think about it, zoomed out in that tab view anymore. Once they give me that sidebar, I stay in it. So I'm going to be happy for that change because I like it. Selfish.
Hell yeah. Well, yeah. So that concludes the changes that are coming to the ad platform. If there's more, which there probably will be, it seems like Facebook's in update season right now. And if there's more, we'll definitely report on it on this podcast. And if you notice that your ads manager is buggy over the next couple of weeks, it's because they're changing everything. So just give them time and it'll all kind of smooth out, once they've fully updated. And with that said, now it's time to talk about branding. Now, we had a great podcast with Casey in episode 88. If you didn't check that out, I'll put it in the show notes. Just go to indepreneur.io/episode 90 and you will see a link to that episode. But I went over with Casey, who's our branding guy, pretty much everything about artist branding. But now I wanted to do another episode with Corrin here about it because we're the marketers who have to actually work with the artist branding. So we're going to have a little bit of a different insight on it than the person actually doing the branding. So first, to kind of kick it off, I wanted to say, or just get out all of the things, the problems we see with artist branding. What we typically see is like, mistakes that make it more difficult to build, solid merchandise or to brand yourself from a website perspective. So the first thing I want to get clear is that artists have no problem making logo types, which is the stylized name of the artist. So for, if my logo were just Circa in some cool font with a gradient on it, that's the extent of most artist branding, is to create some kind of logo type that, is clearly not done by someone who's responsible for branding, companies and artists. It's not a very solid visual brand to just have this parchment paper logo type or something. And similarly, when we do see artist marks, which is the little square logos, they're usually letters. They're usually not marks. They're just the logo type reduced to a couple of letters. And that's, it's not that there's anything wrong with that. It's just that since it's everyone's brand, it ends up not being very unique. And it ends up being not something that I can kind of hang my hat on. And that's pretty tragic because I feel like artists have a lot of potential to make great marks instead of just, letters.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's funny too, because we're a creative bunch, so there's no reason why we shouldn't kind of get out of, our standard element. Right. And I think that there's also, you brand yourself as an artist, but you also brand your albums and you brand your merch and you brand your site and you brand your store and you brand. So I think there's a portion where people are like, well, what things do I put on these should they always all match or do I do it in phases or, how does this kind of work, But if you think about it that way, where it's okay, even if I spin off of this, I mean, my logo is two C's, which for a long time was fine for me. I made my logo in 2008. Well, actually I hired somebody too, but and then it kind of got okay, that's been happening for a while, and pretty soon everyone was making letters. And so it's there's a certain element of it where you want your logo to start speaking, when somebody sees it, they're thinking, oh, that's Corrin Campbell, because they saw two C's. And so letters are kind of the first place where we go, right? It's an abbreviation. It's an acronym for you. But pretty soon, people are going to see enough things with enough letters in them that they're not necessarily going to distinguish you based on letters. And that's why we need colors and a vibe and a font and all of these other things to kind of make it so that when they see something, even if it doesn't say your name on it necessarily, they're still associating what they're seeing with the vibe that is you.
Yeah, and I mean that's important is the vibe. I did all of our Indie Pro members have access to weekly live Q&As with myself, with Corrin, with Jack, our agency lead. So every week we're going live and answering questions. And then at the end of every month, we're doing a live training in the spot of that live Q&A called Ground Reports. And this last month's Ground Report was about branding. And I went over kind of 3 questions you can ask yourself to get out, like, what is your ethos? What is your more conceptual branding? Not your visual, not your logo and logotype and colors and fonts, but just what your brand is. And my 3 questions that have been really helpful for me in branding from an emotional perspective, from a psychological perspective, is why are you doing this? And I mean, really, like, not some answer that you think people are going to like, the real answer why you're doing this. And then 2, who is it for? Like, who is it for? Like, who's supposed to be on the receiving end of this branding? And then 3, if you're successful with what you're trying to do, what will be true? And if you can answer those 3 questions, you usually can get a great idea for like what the psychological and emotional components of your branding are. And from there, you can then begin to work on the visual elements. Whereas, in the typical use case, I'm seeing artists just put up something that looks cool, usually a logo type, something that looks cool to them. It has nothing to do with what they're about, and I can't derive what they're about from it. I should really be able to derive what you're about, or at least in hindsight, when I learn what you're about, be able to look at your branding and say, yeah, that checks out. That makes sense. And so I think the problem is that a lot of artists go to just make a cool looking logo type that they can slap on stuff. And that's about the extent of it. But if you answer these 3 questions first, and then you go into your branding with the intent of conveying that emotion, the colors you pick match up with that psychology, the fonts you pick match up with that psychology, you're going to be off on the right foot. And that's kind of where we want to get everybody. We want to get everybody knowing what their brand is from an emotional and psychological perspective. That doesn't change. And then every logo or logo type they ever have is a reflection of that, so that it's much more consistent throughout.
Yeah. And on that topic, I want to share this book, and I'm going to hold it up for those of you who are on the tube, but it's called Design DNA. And this one is specifically about logos, because I ended up working on a lot of logos when I was dealing with Army stuff and then working with clients and talking about this exact thing. And this book is like $35. You definitely don't need to go spend that. But, there's a lot of digital copy about it online. And so if you want to search it, but essentially it goes into like all of these different logos that like the color and the type and like, what is that emotion? What is it conveying? Is it conveying stability? Is it conveying adventure? Talking about different color schemes and, how that, just like if you, read, I guess, in Home and Garden or something, it'll tell you like, hey, you should paint your room like a blue color if you want it to be calming, right? So in the same way, color and font and stuff do that in your logo. And you don't need to worry about it like the way that an airline would. Like you probably don't want an airline to be conveying like danger or whatever, It's, there's not a high risk involved, but that's definitely an asset that it not only was interesting for me to just know, like what colors I was picking and what that could be like, subliminally, communicating to people. But it was just really interesting to learn about it as I move forward with my album art. And so I think the more that you like kind of embrace this like graphic visual representation of yourself and learn why those things work the way they do and why they communicate what they do, the more that you can kind of let that influence a lot of other things that you do even beyond your logo at that point. And it's not really as hard to learn. You don't have to become a graphic designer to do it.
Yeah, I think like definitely at least you can choose some of the lower quadrants of your visual brand. So like at the top, there's the logo, your mark. And that's like, no, it's not text based. It's, it's the OVO owl for Drake. For us, it is the little guy in the upwards pointing navigation arrow, right?
Or the Pokemon
that's
ball,
the mark.
depending on who you talk to.
Yes, exactly right. Yeah. And so that you might need a designer for if you want something that's going to stand the test of time that looks really good if you're not a designer yourself. going down a little bit, the logo type, well, you maybe can get away with doing that yourself, but you definitely don't want to fly by night. You want to have your emotional and psychological branding elements down so that you know what you're trying to convey with the font you select and the spacing of the letter and everything about your logo type. And then going down a little bit, you could probably select fonts, based off of that emotional and psychological branding, answering those 3 questions. You could probably do that yourself. You could probably choose a color palette yourself using a tool like Paladon. So you can get down some elements of your visual branding yourself without being too worried about it being amateurish or not looking good. But when it gets up there to the logo type and the mark, you probably want to hire a designer. And right now we're hard at work. I've been basically blackmailing Casey to add his services as an indie deal for our Indie Pro members so that they can get discounted Casey branding and graphic design hours, just by being a member of Indie Pro.
Right.
So that will be up soon, I guarantee you. And, it's going to be super low cost comparatively. So I would just hire a designer for your mark. But yeah, those lower elements of the visual brand, you can start to at least get your ideas down for what you want that to be. And it all stems back to the answering those 3 questions and knowing what emotions and psychology you want to convey with your brand. And once you have a visual brand and you have an emotional or psychological brand, then it's all about consistently portraying those elements in all of your content. Every touch you have with an audience member should reinforce those notions. It should drive the point home. And that's what we call building brand equity. When you have 100 experiences with an artist and every time you're getting the same emotion and experience and it's all building on itself and it becomes this consistent expectation you can have of that artist, that's brand equity. And that's really what you're trying to build. That's why you're getting these elements in place.
Right. I mean, if you want to see this executed ad nauseum, go to Taylor Swift's Instagram profile. You know what I mean? Yeah. Like this album cycle, she's like, she only put out 1 song. We've got, I don't know, there's probably like 20 tiles on there right now that are all these like, pastel, shiny, kind of elements. And then like the butterfly is kind of her mascot of this album cycle, and even if you talk to like influencer kids, right, who aren't doing music, or YouTubers, right? Like all of these people very much understand like what their brand is, right? And it's been kind of funny to watch because I consider myself old compared to a lot of these people. And it's been really interesting to see how many 20-somethings are talking about like my brand, right? And what their brand represents and what goes along with their brand and what fits their messaging and their awareness of something that used to be just a very marketing centric kind of topic, So you can probably find a lot of examples online of people who like have a certain aesthetic. Like, if you go like Zach Farrow, who is the former and then back again drummer of Paramore, he's got another band called Half Noise, and like his entire Instagram is like stuff that looks like he pulled out pictures from his parents' shoebox of the 70s. And he shoots, cars that are from the 70s and then puts this like grainy filter on it. And like all of his stuff looks like that. And the band of Half Noise all looks like that. I don't know how, but they found me, which is Dallin Falks, I think is his name. Oh, sorry if I butchered that, but he's the former bass player for Panic at the Disco. So he started a new band called I Don't Know How, but They Found Me. And his stuff is all like 80s and glitch and VCR influence. And like there's nothing like, just going to an artist's website and profile and seeing all of these things that are very much in sync. And so sometimes when somebody like retweets something, I'll see an image and I'll know it's I Don't Know How, but They Found Me, because it's got that vibe, and I'm like, it's coming, So you can find a lot of examples out there. If you feel like, gosh, this seems like I have to figure out a lot of stuff. Well, yeah, you kind of do. But I mean, once you do, it makes people who follow you really engaged on when you post new stuff or when you start talking about new topics, because they know it's coming from you right away.
Yeah. And I would say like, here at Indepreneur, most of our team falls within one of two camps in marketing, which is direct response versus Madison Avenue, right? So direct response is like, hey man, let's get some sales, generate some customers, and then worry about what the business cards look like, Like,
Right.
like let's
Yeah.
not put the cart before the horse. Madison Avenue is like, oh, you're Coca-Cola. Let's tell the whole world that you sell happiness. Like that's Madison
Right.
Avenue style branding. Oh, you're Toyota. Let's make everyone feel safe and comfy with a 30-second television spot. It's not about
Right.
generating sales. It's about generating brand equity. And this is definitely like what we're saying here falls on that Madison Avenue side of things where it's like, look, you're not going to get a result by doing this. Like you're not going to brand yourself and tomorrow, be a solid business. And I think we provide enough information about getting a more immediate result. This is about setting yourself up long term and about what if you're successful? What if you do so much great direct response that now you have a large customer base, a large fan base? What do they feel about you? How do you
Right.
direct their feelings towards you? How do you, sculpt that emotion and that experience that they have with your brand? And that's this stuff. So out of all the Madison Avenue style marketing things you could do, this is probably the least expensive and the most beneficial. And that's kind of why we're talking about it.
Definitely.
Once you get your branding down, and just to recap, like you can use tools like Paladon, tools like Google Fonts to get great colors and color palettes and web safe fonts to represent what your brand is supposed to convey emotionally. You can hire a graphic designer or even get so spry as to learn about Adobe Illustrator and start working in it to create logo type, logo mark. And then where does it go? What is the practical application of this branding? Well, the obvious one, the one that's kind of top of mind for a lot of people is website header and footer and other elements of your website. You're going to want to change the site-wide body and header font. You're going to want to add a lockup of your logo and logo type in the top left of your website and in the footer. But beyond that, there's tons of other applications that we kind of wanted to go over. So yeah, like the first thing you can do is swap out your web presence. That's website header and footer. That's fonts on your website. That's different representations of color on your website. I mean, generally you want your website to either be a dark kind of gray schematic or a more bright like white schematic, but the accent colors, you can start swapping that stuff out. And less is more here, right? You want to be tasteful. Just because your brand has like a stark red in its primary color palette doesn't mean you want to make your website background red.
That'd be pretty difficult to read, I think. And
yeah,
I'm just imagining
it doesn't stop
a website
a lot of
with
people
a
from
bright red
doing
background.
exactly that.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I know what it says.
And then beyond that, there's tons of other uses. There is your email templates. If you're doing email marketing, you're going to want to swap out your fonts that you're using. If you're using web safe fonts that are compatible with MailChimp, but also like in the header of your email, maybe including a logo if it's an email that's particularly important to establishing the brand that someone's experiencing when they deal with you.
Yeah, and here's the thing, right? Because we talk about this with email, especially, is that you can assume very little attention span from anyone flipping through their inbox. So obviously, like the subject line's where you first get them, but then they open your email. Do they know that it's from you? And I think that that's something that, earlier on in your mailing list with a lot of artists that we, bring into the fold who have a new, fresh mailing list, it's good to keep their HTML elements down, right? Because it keeps them out of promo and it keeps, there's reasons why. But then when they kind of graduate from then on, if somebody has been on your list for a while and they've opened a lot of emails from you, at that point, you can start indoctrinating them into more of the immersion experience of email, which is when you want, it to be clear as soon as they open an email, who's this from? And they don't even have to read any of it before they know. And that automatically makes them read more if they like being on your list, which I hope everyone does, So, but I think that, that's what branding does everywhere, right? But especially I think in email where people's attention span is at a premium.
Yeah, and I mean, depending on what your brand conveys, right? Like, does it convey trust, authority, love? Is your music all about relationships? You know, like whatever your brand conveys, that's what your visual brand elements do for the piece of media you affix them to. But the reverse is true. So if you have an email that particularly drives home the point about your psychological and emotional brand considerations, including the mark in that piece of media stacks those emotions onto that visual element. So if your email does a great job of conveying your emotional brand, you might want to include the mark or include the colors or include your fonts in it, because it's going to sort of magically stack those emotions onto that mark so that next time you show it to them, it doesn't have to be about those things. They get that just from the mark.
Yeah, absolutely. And like, if you are someone like me who has like crazy colored hair or something, like that's one thing I noticed was really effective about my branding in my emails is that I started to, and we talked about this before, but I started using Bitmojis at the top of my emails rather than putting my logo in there. And especially because my logo is not necessarily wrapped into the thing. Like my logo is not an example I'd send you to and be like, see how great this logo is? Like, it's not that, right? So when I was talking about putting Bitmojis in there, obviously, you know, and especially people who are going through my album experience at the time, I had bright yellow hair with like green tips. And I knew like, well, there's only going to be so many people they're getting email from that they would think is that person, you know? And then when I changed my hair back to blue, then I made the Bitmoji blue because they were coming in under content that had blue hair in it, you know? And so that was one of those things. And especially like Bitmojis are silly and I'm silly and awkward. And so it kind of worked, you know, but that's the kind of thing that you want to do. Like Cirque's saying is that as soon as they open that email, not only do they know it's from you, but they feel the things that you've dictated are the environment of your artistry. And that only goes further into the buddy system and makes them feel more attached and immersed in it, you know, and that's what you want to be influencing.
I think that's a super important point. It's not just these like logo type colors and fonts. It's other visual elements you affix to your brand. It is the transition you use in your YouTube videos. It is the, you know, it's the accompanying elements that can also stack brand equity so that people
Mascots,
just get a burst. Yes, absolutely. Yeah. So, you know, people get a burst of those emotions that you've been trying to convey the whole time, every time they see an element that they're familiar with, and it all has to do with it. So when people say, oh, that's on brand, you kind of want to audit all of your marketing, all of your communication with your audience to say, is this on brand for me? Does this convey the emotion and the psychology that I set out to have my brand be about? And so the Bitmojis are doing that for you, right? They're showing people, you know, I'm here to have a good time. I'm silly. I'm playing around. It all kind of stacks that brand equity on just the Bitmoji. And then that can also transfer to your marks, and it can transfer to your other visual branding.
Absolutely. And I mean, you don't want to end up like, I mean, I don't know if you've ever seen a flyer for a tour of metal bands, but
oh my God,
it's like 15 words that are all in like slightly similar fonts, right? Like these super aggressive or blood drippy kind of looking things. They always have those extended tails on the left and right so that it kind of looks like it, you know, you can just tell that it's all kind of the same, you know, and it's not necessarily, now here's the thing, there's a fine line between finding, you know, a logo that has, you know, your vibe to it. Because all of those things are communicating that, you know, all of those logos are, but they're all words, right? And they're all, if you look at them all next to each other on the flyer, it's like, whoa, you really, I think it really illustrates how you can go really wrong by just assuming that your name in a font is going to be a good way to segregate yourself from all of the other options out there, right? Because once you look at that flyer, unless you recognize one of those bands' names already, you'll really see how easy it is to get lumped into, you know, something without personality just by picking a font and going with it.
100%. Yeah. And I mean, you are the culmination of that which you repeatedly and consistently do. So, if you are appearing in front of your audience in a way where you blend into a sea of similarly branded, companies or artists, that's not a good place to be necessarily, right? So if that's where you're going to end up, you might want to do everything you can to stand apart, or at least to more strongly convey what the actual emotion is there. And that can be done with email templates, but it can also be done with, how you post on social media or what your ads look like. It can, for instance, like on every single whenever I chunk down for syndication for one of our YouTube videos, I'm creating like a square snippet trailer of the YouTube video we dropped. I'm using our brand colors as the letterbox. So instead of black on the top and bottom or white on the top and bottom of the video, it's our navy blue. And that just drives the point home. The fonts I use there drive the point home. So people not only realize, oh, this is Indepreneur, but they also, everything that those colors and fonts carry with it get affixed to the trailer that I'm promoting. So that's a kind of a textbook example of where you can add consistent brand elements that reinforce that narrative. So website header and footer are a great place to start. Email templates or emails that are particularly important in your business, in your automation sequences, emails that convey your branding especially well. You might want to stack that equity onto the mark, but also your social media profiles. And this is something that I struggle with because I know that there's an advantage to having a face in that little circle on social media. So like if your YouTube channel profile picture is a face or your Facebook profile picture is a face, it's typically more advantageous just because people know, oh, that's that guy. I associate with that. But I really want to stack the experiences people are having with our social media onto the mark, which is why I've chosen to include marks in all of our social media profiles. And that's a decision you're going to have to make for your brand too. Similarly, like if you put a photo there, but you're editing it to represent the colors of your brand, that can also help to stack brand equity. So it's not like a binary decision, but it is a decision you're going to have to make for yourself.
Yeah. I mean, I think if you're going to use like some kind of headshot or picture of yourself, like for example, mine right now is it's basically the photo taken out of my last single cover. And it's very like, there's something about the photo that makes a statement. It doesn't look like a headshot. Fortunately, like Blue Hair makes it kind of easy where if I post a photo of myself, even if it's like really far away or really small on someone's phone, they're going to kind of know it's me anyway. But nonetheless, like the photo I have up right now is a very distinct color scheme, and it's laid over basically a black and white photo where you can't tell that my hair is blue. And so like that color has kind of been the theme because I was doing this single thing. But if you have a band, if there's a lot of you, like there are times when even if I'm interacting with a live video on Facebook or something like that, even with my blue hair, it's so small.
Right.
Like when you're interacting in a live video or even when you're just looking on your phone and people are posting things or commenting, it can be very difficult if you're not very familiar with that person, if that isn't a person who interacts with you often or who is an artist you know very well, it can be really difficult to kind of see who that is, right? And a lot of times that means that you're not clicking on something to open it further, etc. So, if you're a band with 4 people in it, you probably do not want to use a photo of the 4 of you, even though a lot of places will tell you, oh, faces do better. It's like, well, it's not a face at that point. It's like 3 like toothpick men really far away. It's like, it's not even something people can recognize. So the reason why people say faces do best is because a face is unique and recognizable. Right. So,
and our brains are just like hardwired to recognize faces and also to dissect what emotion those faces are conveying, which is why a lot of YouTube thumbnails is a person looking at the camera smiling,
Yeah, absolutely. Totally. Unless they're a like crazy angry person, and then it's their face is angry because that's their brand. But think of it this way, like, because things are so small now, unless that person is already very familiar with your brand and interacting with it a lot, chances are they're not going to recognize you unless you put this kind of work into being consistent across all of your channels and having something that even when it's 12 pixels by 12 pixels, they can still tell that it's your brand. And it's really important, I think, to do that.
Yeah. And I mean, even going so far as like not just your profile picture, your banner on social media, but also your posts. Like if you go on Digital Marketers Instagram right now, you'll see that every quote Instagram that like post that they drop is in this branding that almost has nothing to do with the house brand for Digital Marketer, except the fonts are reminiscent and the way they're using color is similar. Right. It's just not exactly the same. So they've got a white background, black, like, or a grayed out kind of text. And then they're highlighting certain elements of the text with these blue blocks. And then there's white font in the blue blocks instead of the gray font. And that I know when I'm scrolling my Instagram feed and I see that, oh, that's Digital Marketer. They've got some wisdom for me, right? It's creating a little mini brand within their brand that stacks that equity as well. And they can carry that over to ads if they want to. They can carry it over to Instagram stories. They can do all types of stuff with that equity they're building around that look. And so once you've got a very strong house brand, you can spin off kind of like branding series that speak to that emotion, but are slightly different. And they're meant to like make you recognize, oh, I'm in this arena. I'm not in the any arena. I'm in Instagram quotes right now. And I'm getting everything I get from Digital Marketer's house brand, but in that arena.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's something too that, Digital Marketer obviously has their branding, but then they've got this like series of content, right? And YouTubers are really familiar with this as well. It's very like different types of, if they are the channel that runs multiple series, right? They might run different intros. Like our Tiny Toots has its own intro. Yeah. Are you still doing those, Cirque?
Yeah. There just haven't been any recently.
Not as many. Yeah, not as many. Because I know we were doing a lot of content before, and now it's a little bit less because, Cirque needs to live outside of YouTube as well. But I love that had kind of its own intro, right? And so it's, even though that's video, and so there's still a lot that you can do with imagery, right? Because a picture says 1,000 words. So just make sure that you're kind of setting up those words in that picture. And that's what you can do by kind of making these subsidiary things that are still in your brand voice and still in your branding, but are distinctly kind of their own thing as well.
Yeah. And I mean, the way that they're able to do those brand extensions without it feeling off brand. And the reason that we're able to make full stack creative and it still very much feels like Indepreneur is because of the emotion and the psychology. When it all comes from that foundational place, you can spin off, single purpose extensions of the brand, and it doesn't feel jarring. It doesn't feel like I put you in a completely new space. It just feels like, oh, we're evolving, or we're going into this new arena, but with all of the emotion and the brand equity that we've built thus far, which is super important. Like you definitely don't want to, you don't want people to feel as if they're going from inside to outside, like some jarring scenery change every time they're interacting with your brand. You want them to feel safe and comfortable, and also know what emotion is being transmitted to them.
It's funny that you say that, and I hate to keep going back to Taylor Swift, but come on. I mean, the girl knows how to brand. Yeah. But in the video for the new single, the serpent was kind of the vibe of the whole last thing. There was a lot of darkness in that album, and she was using this giant snake, and on tour she had some 3-story tall serpent on stage. You know what I mean? And so at the beginning of the video of this new single that she just put out for this next album, the serpent, a pastel colored serpent, of course, is going along the pavement, and it's winding up to bite you, and then it blows up into a million butterflies.
Wow.
And it's
I didn't didn't even notice that, but you're so right. I saw that. That's crazy.
Yeah. And so
Yeah.
like she was like, okay, this is going to be a clear departure from what you've been seeing from me. So I'm even going to explain it to you. You know what I mean?
I'm going to transition it for you. Right.
Exactly. And like, so like the giant mural that she unleashed in Nashville, like that was a huge butterfly. She was putting out clues for people to find it. She showed up on Monday or Friday or whatever day that was. And like, there were thousands of people there, you know what I mean? And so it's obvious like this is the butterfly scene now, you know, which is so girly and I don't know, butterflies, whatever. But it definitely like she did that on purpose. And I think that's something that when you make these transitions, it's fine to rebrand. If you're going in another direction because of an album or in another direction because you're doing a brand extension, right? As long as it's clear that it's intentional and you can even go as far as Taylor Swift did and like actually be like, okay, this is dummy proof. I'm showing you that it's going from the serpents to the butterflies, right? And you don't always have to be that literal about it. But as long as there's something that is still connecting, and making sure that people, jump across that little barrier with you, it kind of gives you that freedom to do things within the brand because you know that you've kind of set this foundation, as Cirque has said.
Yeah, and it's so, I mean, that's so cool. Like, obviously that's like top of the industry and a lot of money goes into that branding, but like, it doesn't mean that you can't replicate the tactics at a micro level. And that's definitely something to look at. Like, this is the one arena where you kind of can take what they're doing there and do it yourself, and it's not that different. So, it's super, super amazing branding going on there. Of
course.
I think one thing that's not to like be ignored is all of the peripheral elements where your branding can fit. Like our Stripe receipts, when one of our agency clients gets an invoice from us, it's got our branding on it. And there's like little knickknacks like that.
My Stripe receipt actually had, and it's circular. If you've ever sent out Stripe receipts, it had the Bitmoji blowing hearts, blowing kisses. Right. Like,
amazing.
And
right.
the number of messages I got back from fans because that was there was astonishing.
Right.
Because I did not consider it that clever. I was just like, well, I don't really like my logo. I like this Bitmoji thing I got going on. Thank you, Bitmoji. If you ever want to do a sponsorship, let's talk, because it's saved my career for the last 2 years. Made it dummy proof. But the number of messages I got back simply because that was there was shocking, but it just goes to show like how the littlest things when you're kind of sending out emails to people or even sending them receipts, integrating that stuff can be super duper powerful.
Yeah, and it's like that was an opportunity for Corrin's brand to play with her audience, right? And create another experience that's memorable and stacks brand equity just in a Stripe receipt. So keep an eye out for the peripheral opportunities,
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Like
especially
everything can be a cool experience. Everything can be an Easter egg with your branding. Yeah.
For sure. The instant that you can take something that's mundane or kind of everyday occurrence, I mean, everybody gets sent a receipt after they order, unless, if they don't, they're angry, right? And the everyday expectation is that they have one. So that maybe has, if it's a Shopify receipt, it might have a little map on it, right? Where they can go back and check tracking updates later. So like anytime that you can take something that's mundane like that and make it special, that's where your brand is like, that's where it's deadlifting, because it's doing so much work for you that is obviously quite automatable and isn't something that you have to do. It's something that you've already built. And so it works for you behind the scenes.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, when I get I don't know if you guys, like anyone who's listening to this, go check out Bathing Ape and just look at like in-depth screens of their clothes. Every little stitch is a branding opportunity for them. On the inside of my Bathing Ape shirts, there's a tag that has the Bape gorilla head on it for no reason. Like they didn't have to put a tag there. There's already several tags on it. but it
Right.
just added that little Easter egg, and people love that. That's the fun part of branding, man. And then obviously, like, that's a natural segue to the last point, which is like this carries over your merchandise heavily. If you build enough brand equity, I'll buy a Misfits shirt that's just their logo mark, that's just the Fiend, because of all of the experiences I've had with that mark. They can take the mark and make it red. And just that, like, they didn't have to hire a graphic designer for that. They put a red color overlay on the logo, slap it on a t-shirt, and sell out, you know? So it sets up all these opportunities to be really playful with your merch, and also makes your job easier. You can make merch that fans want because they're buying a representation of the brand equity you've built with them.
Absolutely. And I think, that's probably something that the way Cirque just said that, right? Where he's like, I love the Misfits and their logo so much that they can just slap it on a t-shirt and I'll buy it, is a reflection of, see how like that was set up? Like he wasn't like, oh, I want something with someone's logo on it, so I bought a Misfits shirt, And I think that's something that people mistake so much, like that if you make a shirt and slap a logo on it, that you should sell that. And this is more about merchandising than your brand. But I think that you have to have a logo that's that strong in order to sell t-shirts with just a logo on it. So, when you're thinking about merchandising.
It's not just that the logo was strong. It's also that, like if they had just made the Fiend logo back in the 80s and then put that t-shirt out, I'm not going to buy it. It's the brand equity. It's the experiences the cumulative experiences I've had with that mark, Right.
Because the logo it represents a whole deeper story for you than that. So if you're a new artist and you're trying to sell people shirts with your logo on it, they probably don't have that kind of emotional attachment, and that, the mark is meant to remind you and kind of bring you to like a return. It's like a bookmark, and on that bookmark is like a list of all the things you experienced while doing those things, or while experiencing that. So when you see a logo, it brings you back to this like memory bank, right? It's not even just back to a single point in time. And so if you don't have that built on your brand, then you shouldn't be selling stuff with your logo on it. And further, if you haven't developed a logo with that level of intent before then you really shouldn't put it on a t-shirt. You know what I mean? Use your merchandise as ways to support the development you're putting into your brand and the development you're putting into your logo, and make sure that they all have that kind of aesthetic, which is why when you're developing the bigger portions, the emotions and the colors and fonts and structure and all of the things that you want as a part of your brand, those should be integrated into your merch items to support the mark later on down the line, as Cirque's saying. So I think that that's something that, a lot of indies take. I can't tell you how many album launches and different funnels that I've, just audited or looked through, and I've seen a logo on a t-shirt and thought like, man, I get that you feel like you don't know what to do yet, but the logo's not, you haven't established, like the logo isn't even this, might not even be the same color as the website, or have that integrated into the vibe, right? There's no vibe. So definitely think about it as, all of these things are a part of your brand, and you don't want to make a logo do all the work before you've got the story built up behind it.
Yeah. So and that's such a key point to recognize is like, if there's no consistency between the shirt that I'm buying and the website that I visited before that and the album that I listened to before that, if there's no consistency there, I'm not buying a shirt that's reflective of my experience thus far. It's a stranger in the scenario. So when you're going to build your first merch, if you haven't built that brand equity yet, go back to your emotional and psychological brand elements, your vision and positioning statements, and think about, how do I convey convey those emotions and that psychology in a design. And obviously you can use a graphic designer to help you with that. And they'll be so grateful that you're coming to them with those emotions and that psychology and asking them, how do we convey this? Because that makes their job a lot easier. And you can include your marks somewhere on that piece of merch so that you're stacking those emotions onto the mark. And then later you can just use the mark, if that makes sense. You're building that equity now from that emotional place so that later just the mark brings back all those feelings.
Right. And to just like bring in the same example, go to Taylor Swift's website, look at the merch that is exclusive to the new video. It's all in pastels. But it's rainbow pastels, right? So it has this like prismy rainbow pastel vibe to it. And like all of the text that's on the shirt, there's lyric shirts, but then there's little pieces of the merch that have her logo on it. Like go check that out. And I only present that because, it's obvious that she's on Universal and like has somebody who is doing branding. You know what I mean? Because it's like, it's so much more consistent even than before, which has always been there. But, think about how you can implement those kinds of things into your merchandise. Lyric tees are surprisingly good, but if you make a lyric tee with just like whatever font and whatever colors, it's very different from if you make a lyric tee that has similar artistic components to the rest of your brand. And
what lyric do you choose that best, like which lyric out of all the lyrics on the project you're promoting best represents your vision and positioning? Like once you got that down, it becomes easier to choose.
Yeah, and it's not just about what the hook of the song is necessarily. Like sometimes it can be the lyric that most reflects what that song says about you as an artist or you guys as a band, right? Yeah. So I think that's, you want to think about these things as kind of an all-encompassing sphere. If you could make your own planet that had its own color scheme and had its own way of communication, that would be your brand. So like create that world that then applies to all things going forth until you decide to change it purposefully.
Yeah. And evolve it, because when you start from that solid foundation, you don't have to change. You can just spin it,
Exactly. Yeah.
Which is, I mean, that's setting up for the future. And so just to recap, artist branding is typically not very strong at these indie levels. And you want to start off with your vision and positioning, your emotional and psychological branding, answer some important questions about why you're doing this, who you're doing it for, and where it's going. And from there, you can spin off your visual elements. You want to keep that consistent across every interaction an audience has with you. So you're always putting an element of your brand into every piece of media, into every post, into every piece of communication. And you're going to want to obviously deck out everything you do with it as a result, and look for those opportunities to do it in the periphery. Look for opportunities to sneak in on brand experiences like with your Stripe receipts. And it's going to make merchandising so much easier in the future if you do that. And that's all we wanted to convey with this episode.
Absolutely. Yeah. And we'd love to hear your ideas. I mean, leave comments below or, tweet us, obviously Insta us, check out our Instagram profile, swipe some of that. You can definitely see examples of this everywhere. But we'd love to hear, what kind of creative things you're doing with your brand. I think, and share with other people as well in the comments, because I think, kind of that group think is what helps us kind of get outside of our boundaries. Like you make music so you can make this art part too. Just do it on purpose, definitely let's start a conversation, because I think more musicians, it's actually shocking even at a higher level how many musicians just build a brand around their album cycle and it kind of stops there, and then when they have a new album, it might be a whole new thing that they don't really transition to, and could be a whole different vibe. So, definitely find some examples and share them with other indies so that they can see, this is what music branding can do, and what looks good to you.
100%. And that concludes branding month for us here at Indepreneur. So I just want to thank all of you for participating, and I hope that we've done a lot to improve some artist brands. If you'd like to get any of the resources mentioned from this episode, you can go to indepreneur.io/episode 90 and check all of those out. And next week, we're going to be squarely in copywriting month, which means Corrin's going to be taking a little break from the podcast. We're going to bring in Jack to talk about copy. And then we'll be back as the traditional co-host team strong after that month. So thank you so much for joining us, Corrin. And I mean, I wish you all the luck. She's going to be focusing on our brand new indie founder class during that hiatus.
Yeah.
So good luck
I'm
to
super
you with
excited
that.
about that. Yeah, and I'll just mention real quick. We talked about it a few episodes ago, but Indie Founder is going to be relaunching, and when this airs, there'll be a link in the show notes for if spots haven't already filled up. But I'm really excited. We're basically going to be walking through. This one is meant to be kind of a 101 where we're going through, website and first some fan finder testing and evaluating ad response, getting a launch built, and then troubleshooting any kind of album launch we may have on the backside. And so that's going to be pretty exciting. I'm also going to make sure everybody's got their tracking layers set up, and that we'll be doing messenger stuff. So basically, it's group coaching. It's going to be super fun. I'm really excited about it, and the idea is that this will evolve, right? And so someday there'll be like an e-com indie founder class, and then there'll be one that's all about writing copy, which is what Jack and Circa are going to be going over for you next month. So this is just our first iteration, and we're only going to have 15 slots, but I'm excited to see what kind of shakes out about this. We'll be sure to share with our podcast listeners how it went, and how it's going along the way, because I think the more indies that we have activated in that way together, just like we're talking about doing with this branding stuff, get conversation going with other indies so that you can kind of elevate yourself, right? It's going to be super fun. So yeah, I'm looking forward to it, but then I'm looking forward to see what you and Jack come up with for copywriting as well.
Hell yeah. Well, tons of stuff coming. Definitely stay tuned for all of that. And also go to indepreneur.io/episode 90 if you want to check out the resources from this episode. And we will see you guys next week on Creative Juice Podcast. Peace out.